Dear friends, my name is Monserrat. I will present this work. From Deacon's biosemiotic theory, here I intend to examine the diversification of symbolic system in the human evolution. First, I analyze simple symbolic systems of a chimp's experiment and the first symbolic system of earlier hominids and how they were possibly born. Second, I examine the later symbolic systems like language, art, and myth. Also, I examine their commonalities and differences. Then, I try to identify the three roles of symbolic systems and also their different sources of emergent constraints. In the end, I present the hypothesis of a second symbolic transition in the human evolution. The first would be the born of language, and a second is a hypothesis I will present in the end. According to Deacon's theory, the first symbolic system have gradually transformed during 2 million years into our language as used today by us humans. That's okay. The question is, did they evolve just to language, or did they evolve also to other symbolic systems? To check this hypothesis, I analyzed the similarities and difference between them and the common roles of the symbolic systems. Let's start the analysis with a simple symbolic system. There are many experiments with chimps that demonstrate their ability to communicate through several lexigram tokens. But most of them display their smart ability to interpret and communicate indexically. Through extensive training, they learn to associate indexically many lexigrams to their corresponding objects. But in one experiment, scientists verified whether they were able to make the transition from indexical to symbolic interpretation. In this special experiment, there were only 6 lexigrams: 2 foods, 2 drinks, and 2 actions verbs. This one. The specific combinatorial logic was difficult to train because the chimps persisted in assuming indexical relations between lexigrams and results. The difficult transition involved a long training of chimps in that they gradually learned a system of combinatorial exclusion relations between lexigrams of 2 foods, 2 drinks, and 2 action verbs, give and pour. To get a food, for instance, the chimps had to press 2 lexigrams, one of the verb action give and another of a food. Of course, there are many combinations that don't work. For instance, food is not poured and drink is not given. Deacon has described this process in 4 stages. In the first stage, chimps had to sort out all possible combinatorial association of lexigrams. In the second stage, they had to discover the indexical association between each lexigram and its right object of reference. In the third stage, they learned the pattern of indexical correlations between the 2 lexigrams to get food or drink. In the fourth stage, if chimps are successful in the transition, they learn the logical relationships among the symbol tokens that can be seen on the upper part of the diagram of stage 4 there. By being successful in the transition from indices to symbols, they learn the logical classification, liquid-solid, of a simple symbolic system of getting food and drink. What is discovered by the chimps is a symbolic system of liquid-solid classification that allows them to get food and drink. One chimps learned that artificial symbolic system to add a new vocabulary of another lexigram of other food or drink, for instance, became much easier. They only need to find out whether the new lexigrams refers to a new food or drink. Three important notes here. First, the symbolic system is not imposed. It emerged from a system of iconic and indexical reference that are used to get foods and drinks. Second, in the transition from icon index to symbol, the chimps have to drop icon index. That is, to leap from icon index to symbol, chimps have to transcend, to ignore the icon index relationships. Much as to read between the lines, one has to transcend literal meaning. Third, if chimps are able to learn a symbolic system, so should hominids like Homo habilis. According to Deacon's theory, the social niche of early hominids was very special. There are clear evidence of relaxed selection around 2 million years ago. The use of stone tools by upright or hominids has probably induced the processes of relaxing natural selection pressures. It has led to reduction in masticatorial adaptation and also reduction of sexual dimorphism, with less intense male-male sexual competition, a change to a more cooperative social life. But the new social niche was unstable. Among all cases of hunting species, the hominid species was the only one in that there was the alpha number, the alpha hunter who mates with all females, as happened with other hunting species like lions, wolves, and hyena. So Deacon hypothesizes that the first symbolic system could have been the mate contract, in that through rituals, the hominids started to communicate and regulate symbolically who could mate whom, helping to reinforce a more monogamous life, at least for some time. In the case of 6 lexigrams, symbols of 2 foods, 2 drinks, and 2 verbs, the symbolic system emerged from a long training of the artificial experiment. What emerged then is a symbolic system that allows chimps to distinguish symbolically between liquid and solid. In the case of a simple symbol of mate contract, the symbolic system would emerge from repeated rituals of the whole hominid group. So what emerges is a very simple symbolic system that distinguishes between who is married and who is available to mate. We have no way to know for sure which the first symbolic systems was, but from the first ones, they could have been since then under the influence of natural selection and could gradually enhance the new symbolic adaptation. Then in a 2 million years evolution, supposedly, the first symbolic system could have transformed into our language as we know today. An important caveat here must be stressed here. There is no need that the first symbolic system should have been the mate contract. In Deacon's theory, the only need is that the first symbolic system should have been as simple as possible and addressed to solve a hominid problem that could not be sorted out otherwise except by a symbolic means. So, we can imagine other symbolic systems as those to communicate the kinship identity and the group identity, for instance, or a symbolic system of incest taboo that informs and regulates the acceptable mate possibilities within a group, avoiding the interbreed between close relatives. It was to note that such symbolic systems are somehow related, so they may have been born in parallel or maybe together in some way or another. One possibility that could be supposed here is about the stone tool itself that the early hominids were already using about 2 million years ago. We can imagine the stone tool could have been a symbol of the hunting members of the social group, those that were able to hunt for the group, informing symbolically the identity of the hunters to the group. Of course, it's just a hypothesis that should be further explored to check its validity of the first symbolic systems. The validity together with other evidences. Now let's examine the result of 2 million years evolution of the first symbolic systems. Language is the most sophisticated symbolic system, undoubtedly. Language is unique to human beings and its most well-marked feature. But is it the only symbolic system humans have? To check it, let's examine some similarity and difference between what I'm supposing to be the different symbolic system. But before, let's briefly see the definition of a symbolic system. From Deacon's emergent biosemiotic theory, a symbolic system is structured in nested hierarchical levels of semiotic process, those levels of iconic, indexical, and symbolic references. So, a short definition is a structure and a systematic network of symbolic reference reciprocally referenced that emerge from a previous process of experiences of iconic and indexical reference. That means a symbolic system emerges in a process of repeated training, ritualistic ceremonies, or learning. Let's now check the symbolic system, if they fit the definition, if they have common roles. In simple symbolic systems, there seem to be 3 common roles. They communicate a message, give a knowledge, and regulate a norm. For instance, the symbolic system of 6 lexigrams is at once a means of communication to ask a food or a drink, a knowledge of how to get foods and drinks, and is a norm of how to get them in the right way. For instance, food is given, drink is poured. The symbolic system of incest taboo, in its turn, communicates who can be made of whom, represents a knowledge of made possibilities, and is a normative convention about the right and wrong ways members of a social group can be made. Language. Language, obviously, is the main symbolic system to communicate messages by talking. It's the most sophisticated symbolic system and is composed by symbolic words that form sentences capable to represent anything in the world. Language has a complex grammar with many morphological and syntactic rules. Language comprises a vast network of symbol tokens, the spoken words, whose meaning are reciprocally defined. Language seems to be specialized to symbolic communication, but patently, language gives knowledge of everything in the world, including the supposed other symbolic systems. Today, language seems to be part of any other symbolic system. So maybe there is no other symbolic systems, just language that is used throughout society. Is that so? However, the normative role of language is not so clear at first. Is it a norm of the language, or is it a norm about something in the world? For instance, is the normative character of language about how to mate, or how to get foods and drinks, or is it about how to communicate rightly in such a way that the listener can understand correctly what is being spoken? It seems there is a distinction between the external normative role of language, when used to describe the external world, and the internal normative role of language to communicate properly. If this is true, then other symbolic systems may be distinct from language, though they may be still languaged. Let's see now the other supposed symbolic system beginning with art and music. Art, music, and many other aesthetic expressions are very diverse. There is one clear difference here. They also communicate feelings and share emotions that give a sort of an internal and emotional knowledge about the world and people. In general, this aesthetical expression is not spoken, but there are exceptions, like the spoken singing, staging of actors in plays, and loud recitation of poems. Let's see now two more candidates, mathematics and science. Both communicate a message about the world and people that is also a knowledge about them, and that expresses a normative way of how world is and work, and also of how to manipulate the world in the right ways, for instance, to make proper tools and to get food in the wild. Surely, the symbolic system of math and science are somehow languaged, but are they language? If myth is indeed a distinct symbolic system, it's a problematic one. Why? Because ancient myths were always spoken orally. All myths tell the story of a people, tell the origin and identity, tell the origin of their word, and tell all their meanings. So they communicate the whole ideas present and valid to a given society, its culture. Myths also present the current knowledge of a given society and also set up the normativity of that society, the morality of what is right and wrong in that society. Does it mean a myth is a linguistic symbolic system? It does look like myth is a language symbolic system, but also it looks like myth extrapolates language. It's not only language. As far as religion, this supposed symbolic system appears only later with the first civilizations and after the invention of writing. Anyway, religion and myth share many common features. In summary, the symbolic system do seem to have at least three roles: communication, knowledge, and normativity. But there are many other aspects that are not, that are not clear yet. Symbolic systems seem to constrain and channelize human activities. But how exactly do they do so? How should we rightly relate symbolic systems with human activities? The normative role of a symbolic system seems also to give a symbolic power to certain members of a social group or to certain things in a social relation. A king, for instance, or the money of our economy. How should symbolic system be related to the normativity of a specific power in a social relation? Some symbolic systems seem also to communicate an internal and emotional knowledge related to personal identity, for instance, like in aesthetic expressions of art and music. And such emotional knowledge seem to be also somehow related to personal desires. Then, if the normativity of symbolic systems started indeed very early in the human evolution, let's say 2 million years ago, so there must have been an evolution of the symbolic ways to represent desire, guilt, and self-repression. How to relate symbolic systems with desire, guilt, and self-repression? I'm raising such issues not to offer answers to them, but to call attention to the high complexity of the symbolic system in human evolution. There is no simple answer to them. Well, let's come back to the possible distinction between symbolic systems. I present now some criteria to distinguish symbolic system. One is whether there is a distinct symbol tokens of a type, and whether they form a distinct vocabulary with its own systematic logic. Symbolic systems of 6 lexigrams, language, music, and math, do have specific symbol tokens of a type. 6 lexigram system has 6 symbols tokens and its own logic to get foods and drinks. Language has spoken words, a large vocabulary, and a proper grammatic logic. Music has its own song tokens, let's say so, a distinct vocabulary, and its rhythmic sound logic. Also, math has specific quantity tokens with its operational tokens, its mathematical grammar and logic. But the other symbolic systems don't seem to have its own symbolic tokens of a distinct type. They are actually languaged somehow. So I raised 2 more criteria, one related to the telos of a symbolic system. I mean, the purpose of people using a symbolic system, the telos, and the other related to a possible distinct knowledge and normativity that are used by people in a specific human activity. The idea behind such a criteria is that the sources of emergent semiotic constraints may be distinct accordingly to a kind of symbolic system with its respective telos. For instance, language is mainly to communicate. That is, its main telos is communication between humans. So the constraints of language emerge to clarify communication, to avoid ambiguities. On the other hand, the source of emergent constraints of mathematics is to avoid misinterpreting quantities and its arithmetic operations. In an analogous way, the source of emergent constraints of science would be to avoid misinterpreting the workings of nature. But when we reach the social symbolic system, things are not so clear. It seems that the source of their emergent constraints would be to avoid social conflicts, or at least to regulate them to a certain extent. But here I'm not sure about that. If it's correct, we could think of this source as the emergent constraints of morality. Anyway, we still need to depend this investigation. To depend, suppose, to depend this research, I'm following some methodological guidelines.
Monserrat?
Yeah, okay. One is to study the nested semiotic structure of language and other symbolic systems and their possible relationships with language. Another guideline is to explore Dickens' pattern of underlying process of hierarchy, transition, and evolution, that of duplication, relaxed selection, degradation, and new synergies, trying to apply it in the symbolic level of human evolution. Following this line, it should be interesting to analyze possible synergies between the symbolic systems. And of course, we could examine the working of the emergent constraints to verify how symbolic system may be or may not be distinct. At last, I think it's useful to look outside Dickens' approach for other theoretical alternatives to keep open mind. A good example is Tom Linson's study. He has interesting insights like the cultural archives that are passed on throughout generations by language. Although I didn't reach a conclusion about the symbolic system, I will propose now a hypothetical second transition in human level. It is still speculative, but I think it's worth to show it. I found Paul Sappho very interesting image. The first transition, what happens here, influence events here, the second transition. It's just, I saw it and I found very interesting to show. So, in the first transition would be that from early hominids to humans before the great civilizations, from first symbolic system to our language and other symbolic systems. The hypothetical second transition would be from the humans of ancient hunting-gathering people to our contemporary society. In summary, the possible steps of a second transition would be, first, the duplication of forms of getting food since around 10,000 years ago, with agriculture and herding near large rivers, which allowed for the born of first civilizations. So the main relaxed selection effects were the longer time to many other activities. This could lead to the gradual degradations of previous social activities like hunting and gathering, and lead to social addiction of members of first civilization to their new social interdependent activities. It also could lead to the degradation of old symbolic systems, the ancient myths, and to the rise of new ones as the religious symbolic system. Then the second key duplication occurred, the duplication of language with the invention of writing and counting and its diffusion. Then the relaxed selection effects were the longer time for people to think theoretically about knowledge, about the world and about human relationships. Then I suppose that all this complex process, very complex process, have resulted in the first manifestation of a new synergistic level of social regulation with the born of philosophy and democracy in the ancient Greece. Finally, with further duplications, relaxed selection and degradation of written knowledge, that new level transformed into our modern science and contemporary technology we live in today. The idea here presented is an attempt to explore the underlying process of a hierarchical transition at the human level, as I said. I do think these two duplication stages are very clear, that forms of getting food and of language are very clear. But the other stage of deconstruction are not clear, especially the new symbolic synergies. Anyway, in this speculative scenario, my strong suspicion is that consciousness plays an important role in the emergence of the latest symbolic systems, like philosophy, politics, and science. If this is right, and following Deacon's biosemiotic approach, consciousness itself must be seen as a semiotic process, nested in some way or another in previous semiotic infrastructures. Then, as Jay would say about information, it's not a thing called information, but the process of informing. Informing. Yeah. So we could say about consciousness. It's not a thing or a state called consciousness. It's actually a process of becoming conscious. Consciousning. Conclusion. Sorry for the time. As for the first question, I think yes. There are some symbolic systems that are undoubtedly different from language, like math, music, and many artistic expressions. But the others are not so clearly differentiated, especially the social symbolic systems, like myth and religions, for instance. They seem to be distinct, but they are established and used anyway through language. So they should still be open to investigation, to solving. As for the second question, I would say that we are both. We are symbolic species and we are a language species. Our unique symbolic competence means we are able to create symbolic systems other than language, like math, art, and music. But I think it's still early to final conclusions. We need to further investigate and depend researchers. As a final word, I would like to thank Terence, but Terence is not here. He helped me a lot in this work. And also, I would like to thank Jeremy for correcting my English, my bad English, and for many precious critiques and suggestions. He doubted every argument I laid down, so it helped anyway a lot. Thanks. And thank you for the attention.